Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. The Guardian newspaper seems to have difficulty distinguishing between global warming and global cooling. They say that current flooding in Pakistan is caused by global warming. In Pakistan, where unusually strong monsoon rains have damaged more than 1 million homes and killed more than 1,100 people, there are growing fears for people living in communities cut off by devastated flooding fueled by a climate crisis. Now let's go back in time 50 years. January 1972. The Pakistan flood is the greatest natural disaster of this century. It will be a greater disaster if we don't care. The Pakistan flood left 2 million people homeless and starving. Please help them. Every dollar you give will feed 10 Pakistani children a day. The flooding from 50 years ago was much worse than the current flooding. And the press blamed the 1972 floods on global cooling. Time magazine, June 24, 1974. Another ice age. In Africa, drought continues for the 6th consecutive year, adding terribly to the toll of famine victims. During 1972, record rains in parts of the U.S., Pakistan, and Japan caused some of the worst flooding in centuries. Since the 1940s, the mean global temperature has dropped about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Telltale signs are everywhere, from the unexpected persistence and thickness of pack ice in the waters around Iceland to the southward migration of a warmth-loving creature like the armadillo from the Midwest. And The Guardian reported, space satellites show new ice age coming fast. New York Times, July 18, 1970. U.S. and Soviet press studies of a colder Arctic. The United States and the Soviet Union are mounting large-scale investigations to determine why the Arctic climate is becoming more frigid, why parts of the Arctic sea ice have recently become ominously thicker, and whether the extent of that ice cover contributes to the onset of ice ages. In 1970, scientists were so worried about the expanding Arctic ice, they wanted to sprinkle dark coal dust on the ice pack in order to melt it.
Climate experts believe the next ice age is on its way. According to recent evidence, it could come sooner than anyone had expected. At weather stations in the far north, temperatures have been dropping for 30 years. Seacoasts long free of summer ice are now blocked year-round. According to some climatologists, within a lifetime, we might be living in the next ice age. If an ice age is coming, what can we do to stop it? Nuclear energy might be used to loosen polar ice caps. Sea ice could be melted by covering it with black soot to increase the absorption of sunlight. Dr. Stephen Schneider is a climatologist from the National Center for Atmospheric Research.
Can we do these things? Yes. But will they make things better? I'm not sure. We can't predict with any certainty what's happening to our own climatic future. How can we come along and intervene then in that ignorance? You could melt the ice caps. What would that do to the coastal cities? The cure could be worse than disease. Would that be better or worse than the risk of an ice age?
50 years ago, climate experts were predicting a new ice age. But 100 years ago, scientists were worried that the Arctic ice cap was going to disappear entirely. April 7, 1923. North Pole melting. Many glaciers vanished. Is the North Pole going to melt entirely? Reports from fishermen, seal hunters, and explorers who sail the seas around Spitsbergen and the eastern Arctic all point to a radical change in climatic conditions, with hitherto unheard of high temperatures on that part of the Earth's surface. Many of the old landmarks are so greatly altered or no longer exist. Where formerly there were great masses of ice, these have melted away, leaving behind them accumulations of earth and stone, such as geologists call moraines. At many points where glaciers extend far into the sea half a dozen years ago, they now have entirely disappeared. In 1923, glaciers were melting very rapidly, and scientists were worried that the Arctic was going to become ice-free. But NASA shows those years as being among the coldest on record. And NASA shows the 1970s being much warmer than the 1920s. But during the 1970s, the amount of Arctic sea ice was growing rapidly, and scientists were worried about a new ice age. Time magazine reported that temperatures had dropped sharply since the 1940s. So according to NASA, the Arctic melts rapidly when it's very cold, and then the Arctic ice expands rapidly when temperatures are much warmer. This graph doesn't make any sense when compared to the historical record. Ice doesn't lie, but government climate scientists do. Now The Guardian says Greenland is melting down very rapidly and sea level is going to rise regardless of climate action. But the Greenland data from the Danish Meteorological Institute shows the exact opposite. The surface mass balance is the difference between winter accumulation of ice on the surface of the ice sheet and the amount which melts during the summer. For 4 of the last 6 years, including the 2 most recent years, Greenland's surface has gained an unusually large amount of ice. And this year is also getting off to a very fast start. Since the beginning of September, about 70 billion tons of new snow has accumulated on the surface of the Greenland ice sheet. Despite the fact that the surface of the Greenland ice sheet is gaining unusually large amounts of ice, scientists want to take drastic action to refreeze the Arctic. They want to pollute the upper atmosphere with large amounts of dust in order to reduce the amount of solar radiation reaching Earth's surface. So at the same time they want everybody to be dependent on solar energy, they also want to reduce the amount of solar energy reaching these solar panels. This idea is based on the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, which pushed large amounts of dust into Earth's upper atmosphere. This caused 0.4 to 0.7 degrees Celsius global cooling and resulted in major food shortages across the northern hemisphere. So apparently climate scientists want to produce more food shortages at a time when food is already in short supply around the world. And this catastrophically awful idea is based on junk science, propaganda, and general misinformation. NASA says that the increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide over the past few decades has made Earth much greener. It appears that academics want to try to reverse this very positive trend. For Guardian writers, it appears that cold is the new hot.
I came from Alabama with a banjo on my knee. I'm going to Louisiana, my true love for to see. It rained all night the day I left, the weather it was dry. The sun's so hot I froze to death, Susanna, don't you cry.
Toto's been pulling back the curtain on this mass insanity for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki and Upla on the web at realclimatescience.com.